Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Garrett Schmidt, and I'm the managing editor and CEO of VBC Exhibit Hall. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's live webinar hosted by CareSignal by Lightbeam and titled A Perfect Storm, Increasing At-Risk Contract Lives plus Decreasing Nursing Availability. And we're going to discuss building a scalable model for VBC. So very excited to hear what they have to say today. A few items of note before we get started. Everyone has joined today in listen-only mode, so you don't need to worry about muting your mics. This isn't like a typical Zoom call, so we can't see you. But we do want to hear from you. So during the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And we're going to have a Q&A session towards the end where we'll get a chance to interact with some of you there. So please submit your questions. There is a little module there that you have that we're in the question area that you can ask a question there, not the chat, but the question area. And then we'll get to as many of those as we can today during the allotted time. If we don't get to yours, that's okay. We'll make sure to answer you via email later on. So please, up until the very end, go ahead and ask your question, and you don't even need to wait until the Q&A in order to do that. So finally, today's session is being recorded, and so we would love for you to watch it again or share it with colleagues or friends. So what we're going to do is after we're done, I'm going to send you all an email, and this will go to all the registrations or everyone who registered, even if they're not in attendance right now. And it'll have a link to the recording, and it'll also have a place where you can download the slides and then some more information about how you can get in touch with the CareSignal team. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. Blake Margaff, he is the president and CEO of CareSignal. And also Shelly Davis, who's the VP of Clinical Strategy with Lightbeam Health Solutions. And they'll give you a little bit more in-depth intro on themselves. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Blake. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much, Garrett. Everyone who's taken the time, thank you. Discussing prior to getting started, I think you should all know that you're surrounded by some of the most forward-thinking peers in the industry, several dozen individuals that have had a major role in advancing value-based care already. So speaking on behalf of Shelly and myself, it's a privilege to join you, and I'm really grateful for your time. Before I dive in, let me take a moment to brag on Shelly, who is the Vice President of Clinical Strategy for Lightbeam Health Solutions. Shelly's background is uniquely intersectional. It is deeply clinical, but also with lots of clinical leadership and a deep consultative understanding of how that ties into the technology that we need to adopt in order to advance healthcare. Shelly was a pediatric critical care nurse and an officer in the United States Navy Nurse Corps. So suffice to say, you're in good hands, at least as long as Shelly can get there in time for whatever happens. Shelly, thank you. I'm so pumped. This is going to be a whole lot of fun. Let me go ahead and dive in and share what I believe are some best outcomes for today's presentation. First, I'd like to introduce you to perhaps a new term or a term that's somewhat nascent in the industry, which is rising risk and rising risk management, and understand how succeeding with rising risk management can drive clinical and financial returns. I'd like to perhaps break some mental models about what true at-scale remote monitoring and engagement is. This is not 10 patients with kits. This is not 100 patients with kits. This is not 1,000 patients with kits. We're talking about truly scalable, impactful remote patient monitoring. And then I'll go through a broad range of case studies, and this will be a slightly unique presentation. The last third or so of the presentation, this 30-40 minute initial section, I intend to share from a variety of different provider and payer types and across a broad range of angles. Shelly and I are going to discuss how this can impact any number of populations and priorities. And the best outcome above all is that everyone here has a chance to fully intuit why now is the time to lead your organization through VBC enablement, even as we've already started down that path in a lot of ways. So let's start with a bit of background. The other thing that I really love doing, Shelly and I resonate on this, is I love pulling the very latest literature, ideally up to the month literature. So let's start with some of that. First, worth noting that value-based contracts and organization types and structures have continued to accelerate. There's a bit of a fallacy floating around that because ACOs have plateaued, value-based care has plateaued. While there was a pandemic, CMS took necessary action to pause things to make sure priorities could be aligned. And that ACO plateau is alongside the explosive growth of a variety of other areas. I also did a little bit of digging, and it turns out that even as ACOs have scaled up dramatically in total number across the United States, the number of attributed lives per accountable care organization on the Medicare shared savings side has not changed very much at all. In other words, it's stayed about proportional to the number of ACOs, which means that this continues to be an open landscape. This is a relatively blue ocean for folks that want to dive in for the first time. And I believe that CMS is signaling more and more investment there as well. Also, fun statistic, and I would encourage anyone interested to read this Health Affairs article linked at the bottom. I didn't know this. Only 4 out of the 54 programs that the CMS Innovation Center has rolled out as value-based or risk-based models have been mandatory. So a lot of the analyses that we read, written by a broad range of pundits, stating that value-based care isn't successful, doesn't work. Well, there's a huge amount of bias there, a huge amount of selection and survival bias, because groups that realize they aren't performing well, they opt out, which is totally understandable. That's the financially prudent decision, but I would encourage all of us to take heart because the trend continues to be very intensely toward value. But there's some bad news as well. Right now, as we're all acutely aware, there are striking nursing shortages. This latest study came out on March 2nd of this year, just a handful of days prior to this webinar if you're watching or recording. And it really is the triple threat. Much of the current nursing workforce is anticipated to retire. New payment models will pull heavily on the Goldilocks skill set that nurses bring to healthcare, spreading the current nurse superheroes even thinner than they already are. And the upper pipeline, both interested young individuals, young professionals, and the faculty training those individuals are both dwindling, are both at some of their lowest rates historically. And unfortunately, the bad news doesn't stop there. This article published in the January-February publication of LWW showed pretty strikingly that whereas a fully nurse-staffed organization, this happened to be a Boston institution, you can find the full name in the publication, where a fully nurse-staffed provider was able to achieve health parity for white and Black patients who had recently suffered strokes. When the nursing shortage pulled nurses away and increased the ratio of nurses, I believe it was more than 3 nurses, more than 3 patients per nurse, no longer was health equity achieved. In fact, Black patients suffered a 27% higher readmission rate than white patients. So to the extent that all of us are rowing toward health equity long-term, this is a real problem, and it's not enough to just grin and bear it. We have to solve this using technology. So a final point, and this comes back to the best outcomes of today's presentation before we dive in. It's also not enough just to focus on the highest risk patients, on the super utilizers. We need to move into rising risk, which is broadly defined as the group that's around 4 to 5 times larger than the patients in the high risk bucket. Rising risk patients are really challenging because they have about a 1 in 5 shot on any given year of becoming high risk. But until then, they're not necessarily that expensive. You may have also heard the term brittle well, right? All defining this same really challenging but really worthwhile population, the kind of population that we need to support at scale if we're going to succeed in value-based care. And of course, as you see in the bottom, adding more staff, it's not sustainable. Heck, it's not even viable right now. So to recap the bad news of the day, we need to embrace value-based care models to succeed financially. We need to do that while clinical staff are facing a shortage that's once in a generation, and specifically while key teammates, nurses, are demonstrably essential for the advancement of health equity in addition to financial success. And we need to do all of that while serving way more patients than we ever thought we would need to serve before. And I think it's pretty fair at this point to feel something like this. Always good to have just a tiny bit of humor as we're facing these incredible circumstances. But we are not here today to complain. We're here to tackle these thorny problems head on, and by doing so, support the patients who have the very most to gain. So let's dive in to how we can do that. First is we need to define the status quo, and then we need
Looks like we're having technical difficulty here for a second. Blake, are you able to hear me?
Garrett, can you hear me?
I hear you, Shelley. This is
okay.
Okay.
Quick thumbs up. Can you hear me okay?
yeah, we got you now. That's one of the things that we have to deal with when we do a live presentation. No worries, we got you back, Blake. If you could just rewind about 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. All right. Shelley, did we reach Picard?
We did enjoy the dark humor available there. Like if you can just kick it off from the top of this particular slide.
Perfect. Thank you. This time, in simple terms, calls for a paradigm shift. We need to shift from a manual outbound model of care management to an automated inbound model that also comes with benefits that include both greater scale as well as true top of license care delivery. And this is particularly exciting, right? Because not only here are we tackling the problem of clinical staff scale, we're also delivering higher satisfaction to clinical teammates who might otherwise feel burnt out, who signed up to provide healthcare and instead who are making lots and lots of cold calls. And there's no way around it. That's just not sustainable. Diving further into how CareSignal works, let's start with the technology. We need to use technology denominator, almost ubiquitous within the patient population that we're serving. In the case of CareSignal, that means text messages or phone calls to capture the right information from the right patient at the right time. And again, that's the second of the key ingredients to this shift from outbound manual outreach to an inbound automated model. Some highlights here, just to do away with any possible misconceptions. By using this technology, no new devices are required for any patient. We're using text messages if the patient has a cell phone. We're using phone calls if not. And even if that cell phone is on a pay-as-you-go plan or is government subsidized, we can still make sure that every message that is sent to and received from that cell phone is at no cost to the patient. And that opens up broad parts of the population, perhaps lower socioeconomic status individuals that might otherwise be disenfranchised from this kind of technology interaction and engagement. I'll dive into some of the additional capabilities as well. And let's go deeper into one of the other key differentiators. Everything that we're going to discuss today, every case study that we're going to show, leverages a broad portfolio of what we describe as deviceless remote patient monitoring programs. And you can see here on the left, this is more than just chronic conditions, more than just behavioral health and social determinants of health. We even have niche healthcare economic aligned use cases for post-discharge, care coordination, and a broad range of general programs for populations under all types of contracts. And above all, now 13 peer-reviewed journal publications showing that these deviceless RPM programs in a condition-specific way deliver defensible clinical and financial improvement, not just compared to another cohort, but in true prospective randomized controlled trials. In other words, these programs work, not just clinically, not just financially, not just operationally, but all of the above. And here I'm about to toss Shelley to you to dive into the secret weapon, I think, of CareSignal, which is Lightbeam, and of course, vice versa. Let me walk though through what happens when CareSignal is able to receive a list of eligible patients. Once our team receives that list, our engagement specialist center reaches out with completely white labeled communication Hi, is this Mary? I'm calling on behalf of Dr. X office with a new free program to keep your heart healthy. Would you prefer to receive questions via text message or phone call? At that point, we see extremely strong patient enrollment and activation and then retention rates. And CareSignal automatically receives real-time patient-reported outcomes so that the system can automatically stratify the patients that need that support. And again, this comes back to our paradigm shift at the start. From outbound, totally gone, now to inbound, where only the right patients who warrant that higher level of care are receiving that top of license care at the right time. It's never a burden to the patient, nor to the care manager. And then only for the fraction of patients that warrant additional clinical escalation are those resources brought to bear. This isn't a assign one doctor or one nurse to every patient. Quite the opposite. Shelley, if you're game, I'll pass the ball to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Garrett, thank you for the opportunity to be here. As Blake mentioned, my name is Shelley Davis. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Strategy. As he also mentioned, I'm a registered nurse. I feel very passionate about care management. I also feel very passionate about following my calling of nursing for now 28 years, though I don't like to say that because it does make me feel quite aged. And I bring you greetings from the RISE conference here in Music City. We are in Nashville. I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for the opportunity. And I've answered the question quite a few times the past few days is, what is LightBeam? What is CareSignal? I like this slide. It can be a little overwhelming, but I think it gives a great snapshot of what LightBeam is and how it so elegantly bookends what CareSignal does. At the very foundation of what CareSignal or of what LightBeam is we are an enterprise data warehouse. Data is not exciting, it is not sexy, but it is extremely vital. And in this move where we're seeing organizations and members move into retail spaces and driving convenience and changing providers and heading to providers that offer more convenience after hours, getting prescriptions filled at a variety of different places, getting their DME from a variety of different places. There are data points everywhere, and that makes it challenging for an organization, a provider, to deliver healthcare in the most optimal way. We collect billions of data points. We bring them into the warehouse. They're staged, they're normalized, they're deduped, and we present to our organizations and to our providers a very concise but detailed view of individual patients and entire populations. We also have the ability to provide insights. Being here at the RISE conference, I've spoken with other solutions and they talk about identifying patients and offering a list of patients. Well, they identify and they provide a list to the organizations that they work with. Lists are important. Patient identification is important, but at LightBeam and with CareSignal, we make it actionable. We alleviate administrative burden because my brothers and sisters who are working as physicians and nurse practitioners and care managers, care coordinators, they already struggle enough with the additional responsibilities they are tasked with every day. And what we do is we allow them to return to working at top of licensure. We take away their administrative burden or minimize it to the degree that we possibly can, and we're always looking for ways to innovate. We provide insights. We do risk stratification through our very powerful cohort builder. We can segment populations, but we go beyond that and we actually automate it. And that is where CareSignal comes in, as well as some of our other solutions as part of LightBeam. We close care gaps, we look at HCC recapture, and truly what I think is the difference is that engagement. So we start with data aggregation, we do identification, we do engagement, execution, and then we measure. Part of the execution and part of the engagement are our engagement tools, and I really feel like they are a differentiator in the market. We have patient engagement tools, so we have the ability to impact patients. We have provider engagement, so we get that provider buy-in so that they can get back to being providers. They're very relational. They went into medicine because they like working with patients, not because they want to manage the very different various factors of a value-based contract or different models within that system. We have provider and executive dashboards that show exactly where a provider is on a peer-to-peer comparison, where they are in terms of meeting their bonus from an overall population standpoint. Where are we with different initiatives? Where can we redeploy some resources? Where are we finding success, and where there are some opportunities? We also have our advisory services. We don't like to let an airplane fly with empty seats. We have clinical and financial advisors who truly are subject matter experts. They come with very robust backgrounds in terms of advisory. We have everyone is assigned to a client. We're able to ensure that we're looking at your programs, identifying again where there are some opportunities. And this is where CareSignal has been so pivotal to what we do, is that engagement piece. And then we have the ability to look at analytics, look at where we're seeing success, and again, redeploy some resources. Next slide, please. So that's a little bit of what is Lightbeam. This is the results that we see. And really, at the end of the day, the results are most important, because it doesn't matter what we do if we're not impacting the outcomes, if we are not making patients' lives better, if we are not delivering value to our organization, nothing on the previous slide matters. What I am happy to say is that we have over 17,000 physicians and 42 million patients that we help to manage. We do all of that delivering $1.5 billion in gross savings, and we do it with a 98% quality score. We're also very patient-centered. We have quite a few clinical experts at Lightbeam. We are all passionate about impacting the lives of the patients that our organizations care for, and we are honored to know that we are caring for someone's most important person, and we never lose sight of that. We're also continually innovating, always looking for new ways to deliver value, always looking for ways to impact patient care. We also have HITRUST certification. Data privacy is something that is extremely important. We take it very seriously. HITRUST is a reflection of our commitment to data security, and we are predictive. And again, this is where the CareSignal solution has been so impactful, because as Blake mentioned, how do we impact the rising risk? As a nurse, as a previous care manager, we were always focused on the top 3 to 5%, because you have to. They're your greatest utilizers, they're your greatest spend, they're your most complex patients, they're the ones in the need of most care coordination, but they are also the most difficult population to manage. They're very difficult to move the needle on. So looking for ways to move the needle and to be able to impact and intervene when they are still in the rising risk, so that we can save utilization, improve outcomes, and improve well-being. We do that through some of the predictive analytics that Lightbeam has, but also now with CareSignal. We partnered with them beginning in December, and I cannot tell you how excited I am that they are part of the Lightbeam family. Next slide. We look at who Lightbeam is, the outcomes. This is a little bit about how we do it. We have several algorithms that are within the Lightbeam platform. We have Johns Hopkins ACG model that leverages risk and helps us to stratify patients. We also have a proprietary Able to Impact score. That is a score that identifies the patients and lets the care teams know that with a little care coordination, some education, a little bit of care management, these are those patients that you're going to be able to move the needle on. We also use the NYU Emergency Medical Services algorithm for avoidable ED visits, as well as the Charlson Comorbidity Index. As I mentioned, we do have our cohort builder. It is beyond one of my most favorite parts of Lightbeam is the ability to identify patients. And we have automation in place for that identification. And that's where we blend so well with CareSignal. We can identify those patient populations that need care coordination. They need an annual wellness visit. They have an open care gap. They are in need of deviceless remote patient monitoring. We identify, we automate, we get them onto somebody's work queue so that we can do more with less. We can take administrative burden off of the care teams and just put it into action to allow them to do what they love to do most, which is impact patients. As I said, we also have a care management module, which is something that we use. And again, we have integration with CareSignal so that everything comes in and is very streamlined, very blended approach for patient care. We also, again, we have analytics. And although, as I said, data is not exciting, we have a tremendous amount of it. And we get excited about data. We are data geeks because data tells us everything we need to know. We see where we're moving the needle. It tells us where we're not moving the needle and where can we deploy additional resources? Where are we having successes? Where are we with our targets? Where are we with the goals that your organization has? Next slide. We talk about the success bottleneck, and I will I'll allow Blake. I know Blake has a great deal of excitement about this slide as well. I think it's a great slide, and it talks about we have what we call the BBC playbook, and I mentioned our advisory services. Those are team members who partner with you and are in your system all the time. We're able to look at where we have opportunity, from staffing, looking at, again, annual wellness visits, where are those opportunities that we can look at. Resources are finite, staffing is finite, time is finite. So really being able to, in this day and age where there is staffing shortages, how can we focus on top of licensure, the most impactful work? And that is where our relationship, that is the genesis of our relationship with CareSignal. We were so convicted by what they were doing from what a single care manager could do, the impact that they had to not only the organization and the value-based contract, but also to the patients that they were serving. We are so excited and thrilled that they are now CareSignal, a Lightbeam company.
I feel so strongly the same way, Shelley. You know, dropping pretense a bit for everybody who's taken the time to join us today. Starting CareSignal as a business about 6 years ago, the premise was, instead of building technology and then, you know, pounding down the doors of all of you, of you folks that have so many important decisions to make and patients to support, we wanted to start with research, start with evidence, start with data. And we found truly a companion in Lightbeam in that regard. And together, to summarize everything that, you know, I described and that Shelley articulated so well, this means that we are in a position to go far beyond knowing who needs help and to go far beyond just being able to improve clinical outcomes for a handful of patients once identified. Together, now we're truly able to generate insights and then transform those insights into outcomes for our partners at massive scale, which is the vision of our entire company as one. So, Shelley, what do you say? Shall we go into?
Sorry, if I could just speak to this slide for just a moment, because this is one of my favorite parts. In a typical traditional care management program, there are some inefficiencies, and up until this point, we thought that you just couldn't get around the inefficiencies. I could manage 120, 140 patients. I had a team of 60 care managers that I worked with, and they were all doing something similar. They were calling, they were leaving messages. The patient would call back at the end of the day while you're on the phone with somebody else, and then you're trying to catch them again. And how could we really move the needle? And this turns a traditional care management program on its head. It makes it an inbound program. So a single care manager can now successfully and effectively manage 1,500 to 2,000 patients. And we'll talk about alerts and what that looks like in just a moment. But truly, it lets us know who needs our help today. It gets rid of a lot of the inefficiencies from a traditional care management program. We are moving the needle. We are transforming healthcare, and I could not be more thrilled about it.
So well said. So completely agreed. With that, let's dive into stories. That's a great context. I think everybody deserves some stories here. So let me start by bragging on a partner that it's truly a privilege to serve, which is ESSA Health, based in and far beyond St. Louis, Missouri. ESSA is a top performing Medicare Advantage focused physician group. And when I say top performing, you can pull up stars online and get a sense of exactly how humbling ESSA's forward-thinking investment has been over the years. And ESSA came to CareSignal and said, hey, we're already doing a great job serving our rising risk. have scalable models in place, have great devices, some good partnerships. And what we want to do is see if we can squeeze any more blood out of the turnip, to use their turn of phrase, and move to the medium or the rising risk patients in our population. And ESSA was optimistic, but also slightly skeptical that this could work really well. After all, as an organization, they already had so many great programs in place to drive these outcomes. Well, the first thing that we measured in our partnership was staffing efficiency. Even before we get to the clinical outcomes and potential financial returns, exactly, Shelley, as you said, the question was, can we scale the current care management capability, and can we materially increase the ratio of patients served to care managers? And as it turns out, the answer was a resounding yes. In fact, we saw with ESSA a textbook, even slightly better than average increase, wherein the ratio went from 1 to 100 care managers to patients to 1 to 1,500. And it's worth noting that during implementation, CareSignal actually displaced the other vendors that were used. I would say vendors rather than partners. We strive to truly be a partner. And we were able to serve not just the rising risk members of ESSA's population, but the high risk members as well, collectively thousands of individuals with CHF, COPD, diabetes, and now even serving areas such as social determinants of health. The next question, though, was what are the clinical impacts? And in addition to reducing emergency department visits by almost 50%, we demonstrated strong improvements in utilization reduction for CHF and COPD, and for frankly a pretty well-controlled patient population on the diabetes side. A1Cs were pretty well managed. We still saw an average more than 0.5% drop in A1C over the first 6 months. Hypertension also improved markedly, and that was almost exactly identical to the peer-reviewed publication that CareSignal has for hypertension. And to bring it all home at the end of the day, I won't hold back the punchline. This partnership resulted in, across a multi-year, multi-thousand patient claims analysis, an 11% reduction in total cost of care for patients on CareSignal versus patients receiving the standard of care. This has been validated and rerun multiple times and has the full approval of the ESSA executive team. This is more than just, of course, a quantitative argument. It really is a privilege to see the feedback from ESSA sharing that, but for CareSignal, that rising risk population may have gone completely unserved. Equally humbling was the chief information officer's feedback that in her decades of experience, this was the best implementation with a technology partner that the organization had experienced. So, as I promised at the beginning, thousands of patients, cool, but we all know about implementation for RPM and engagement technologies that have scaled in clinically impactful ways to thousands of patients. What about tens of thousands of patients? What about more than 30,000 patients? And not just for the big chronics, not just for heart failure and COPD, but for areas as disparate as breastfeeding adherence, as asthma, as depression, anxiety, social determinants of health. And in this case study, and we're getting ready to publish, so this is still unbranded, but in this case study, we saw those more than 30,000 patients generate more than 80,000 patient-reported outcome-triggered alerts. And when those alerts are generated, as Shelley mentioned, it's the downstream follow-up, the real-time, patient-specific interventions that drive financial returns. This isn't magic. This isn't some magical single message that will align with every patient. This is you. This is you doing the work that you're so good at doing and doing it for exactly the patients who need it at any given point. And the results there were striking. We saw millions of savings across all of the major areas: asthma, COPD, diabetes, a general post-discharge monitoring program designed to capture any confusion from a health perspective that patients might have, as well as any deterioration of condition regardless of the underlying etiology. And on the heart failure side, dramatic, more than $17 million in savings. And this means that overall, CareSignal drove more than $32 million in value, and per 1,000 patients, reduced ED visits from just over 1,000, striking in its own right, because these were the individuals that were included, exactly as Lightbeam helps partners identify just the right patients to include for any given intervention set. And that was reduced to below 750 patients, or below 750 ED visits per 1,000 patients. I don't want to drag on too much, but let me just paint a picture for a moment as to the breadth and applicability of the combined Lightbeam CareSignal solution for partners that are looking to both move into value-based care and do so in a way where you have to do and can do much, much more with fewer staffing resources than you've ever had before. Let me tell you the story, for instance, of OSF, another phenomenal, highly mission-based collaborative health system that serves patients throughout and beyond the Illinois area. And OSF used CareSignal almost exclusively for post-discharge. In fact, this case study focuses on the post-discharge use cases, wherein not only were millions of automated outreaches conducted, but those more than 13,000 timely alerts resulted in improvement for CHF and COPD to the tune of millions of dollars saved and dramatic risk reduction in the crucial 30 and 60-day period post-discharge. Also worth noting that the workflow among OSF and the engagement specialist team that CareSignal provides was so well integrated that on average, the OSF discharged individuals were contacted for enrollment within less than 3 hours of that list being provided to the CareSignal engagement specialist team. Put yourself in the shoes of one of these patients, or perhaps one of the concerned caregivers of one of these patients who's answering the phone and responding on behalf of the patient. That's a terrifying time. And it's really empowering to know that not only did you get that touch shortly afterward, but that you'll start getting questions that ask about things that you can respond to. Do your legs feel puffier than usual? Did you wake up last night struggling for breath? How is your breathing today versus yesterday? And depending on your answer, is there any more sputum production than usual? Actionable, empowering questions that meet patients where they are. And of course, you can guess what the demographics are for CHF and COPD. But what about the other end of the spectrum? Let's go to one of the largest federally qualified health centers in Colorado. Also, one of the most successful FQHCs in Colorado, with now 18 locations, 18 full clinical locations, as well as some school resource centers. And Stride did a phenomenal job not only identifying patients that could be enrolled in CareSignal to reduce clinical staff time, but were also eligible under Colorado legislature for chronic care management under Medicaid. So this is truly a win-win. Better, more scaled staff, improved clinical outcomes, and some revenue generation opportunities when the appropriate time was spent. And at the end of the day, it's worth noting that patient satisfaction skyrocketed and continues to succeed as a result of this program. Let's shift again. Now let's migrate on up to the northern part of the United States. Let's head to Wisconsin to a phenomenal health plan known as WEA Trust, now rebranded as NewGen, which is known across the state for having one of the most thoughtful, well-cultivated plans and set of offerings, specifically targeted public sector employees across a broad range, teachers, firefighters, and beyond. And WEA Trust saw 75% engagement at 6 months for patients that enrolled into CareSignal. Saw improvements in outcomes for patients with diabetes, hypertension, and I think one of my favorites here is one of the big questions was for individuals who might be more elderly, perhaps dependents of covered individuals with COPD, how do they feel about this program? And we saw that 100% of enrollees into the COPD program through multi-channel enrollment reported improved perceived communication quality with WEA Trust. Never need to know CareSignal. CareSignal is always white labeled in the background. What matters here is a tighter payer-member relationship and more perceived trust. And this goes on. This goes on for a large Medicaid plan with a multilingual population in Texas that required different types of enrollment languages in order to scale the care coordination team that frankly was constantly strapped with all of the priorities, and required innovation from a patient and member enrollment perspective so that even the enrollment stage met members where they were using text messages if they weren't able to answer the phone given their work schedules. This extends to a wonderful group in Texas, behavioral health called Andrews Center, where as a result of the low cost to patients served, low complexity, the very minimal literacy requirements, because again, CareSignal can use phone calls if patients aren't able to consistently read and respond to text messages. We were able to drive strong improvements in actionable alerts for mental health, as well as improve medication compliance and adherence using dedicated programs focused on those areas. So Shelley, I'd love to, after just the next couple of slides, I'd love to invite you to share other thoughts and reflections, especially as we're relatively early in this phenomenal partnership. And I'd love to invite the audience as well. You know, of course, I jump at the chance to speak with you, but try it out for yourself. See how CareSignal feels from the perspective of both the nurse, the care manager or care coordinator, as well as the patient across a broad range of different conditions. I think pretty quickly when you see how this feels yourself, you'll intuit the value, not just to your staff, but also to the patients and members that you serve every day. And you can do that by heading to try.caresignal.health. Let me pause there before we move to Q&A. Shelley, what else is on your mind?
Blake, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment, and granted, I am biased by my pediatric background, absolutely. When we talk about value-based contracting, often we're talking about, you know, Medicare, MSSP, that particular patient population. But one of the case studies that really I found to be impactful, not surprising, but the impact from CareSignal's work with pediatric patients with asthma. Can you, and the ED utilization, not to put you on the spot because this was not planned, but do you happen to have that case study in this particular slide deck?
Let me see. I'm not sure if that's in the slide deck.
Okay.
But I'm sure together we can do justice verbally.
It is a program. They were able to leverage CareSignal to reach out to, or we were able to leverage CareSignal to reach out to the pediatric population, those patients who have asthma, and we're able to work through the concerned caregivers, and we're able to, there we go. And I will stop. Go ahead, Blake.
Exactly as you're saying, Shelley. I think everybody here knows that the most common cause of ED visits for children, concerned caregivers bring those children is asthma flare-ups. And that is, you know, it's almost a moral imperative for us to improve that, to support the literacy for the caregivers, because all it takes is tracking rescue inhaler use and potential exacerbations in order to reach out in a timely way to educate parents or caregivers on the appropriate management pathways. And that's exactly what CareSignal has been able to do. And as a result, more than 30% reduction in emergency department visits for that PEDS population, which is pretty cool, pretty rewarding. And you can even see these questions here, right? Where this is, you know, this is more than a nudge. This is more than an educational message. But all of the questions that come through, white labeled, of course, but that are sent automatically by CareSignal to the patients or concerned caregivers, all of those questions are actionable. You don't need to have a Bluetooth connected spirometer to provide answers 1, 2, or 3. And they're also empowering, because if everything's going fine, maybe the parent doesn't answer those questions all the time. But when something starts to go sideways, not only does the parent or caregiver know that there will be a phone call in the very near future, but CareSignal will automatically provide the right phone number for the right point of contact for natural escalation by that caregiver. It kind of just makes sense, and it's exciting that we can do that at scale.
Absolutely. And I just want to speak to 2 more points with my experience in care management and as a nurse, because I would imagine that there are some that are on this call or listening to this recording that think 1,500 to 2,000 patients, that seems to be an impossible task to be able to stay on top of. And alerts, we're very sensitive to alert fatigue. There are alerts and incoming escalations everywhere in healthcare. Physicians and providers have pagers and taps on the shoulder and phone calls and text messages. So to speak just a little bit about the patient numbers, when you look at the typical patient caseload, all of that work that's being done automatically in the background, The number of alerts that actually come that need to have action by a care manager or care coordinator is about 30 a day. So we are finding the needle in the haystack with this particular model. We are letting you know exactly who needs your help today, getting rid of all of the inefficiencies. And from the alerts, Lightbeam is an extremely sophisticated and robust platform. We are able to customize based upon what the clients desire and what their needs are. So if it is that you want it to be on the third day where someone's blood sugar is being reported in the 200s, and that is, we need to get Mrs. Jones in here maybe next week, or that shows up automatically on somebody's workflow. Maybe it's an administrative assistant who is going to make a call and say, hey, Dr. Smith took a look at your blood sugars. He's a little concerned. He was hoping that maybe you can come in the next week or so. It builds the bridge. It builds that connection to the primary medical home. It also ensures that we're intervening as quickly as possible at the earliest place in the care continuum as possible. We also have the ability that if somebody, and Blake, I'm sure you have want to speak to this as well, but from the behavioral health standpoint, if somebody does start to experiencing worsening symptoms, suicidal ideation, we have the ability to connect them immediately to the National Suicide Hotline. It is automatic. It gives feedback to the care manager that a call that lasted 17 minutes with the National Suicide Hotline took place, so that again, the care team can intervene and do follow-up and ensure that the patient is getting the care that they require.
Exactly. I found this just in time. I apologize, Shelley, but the power of having a care management module built into the population health platform, again, it falls firmly in the bucket of why didn't we do that sooner? And then enabling and empowering care management teammates to follow up with care steps that are tied to specific alerts. Let's put aside all of the clinical, all the workflow efficiencies. That means that when care managers pick up the phone and have a real telephonic interaction with a human, that human wants to be connected with. It's not an out of the blue annoying check-in or anything like that. This is a real timely caring follow-up. And that's non-trivial, especially as HCAHPS become, what is it now, triple weighted, and satisfaction is more important than ever.
Absolutely.
All right, well, if we had 7 more hours, Shelley, I think that you and I could finally exhaust ourselves. Garrett, are there any questions by chance? Should we dive into Q&A?
All right. Yes, there are some questions, and this was, gosh, this was such a great presentation, and there's so many things here. It's very rich. So we'll get to the questions we have. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we'll get to as many as we can. And if you have some questions last minute, go ahead and submit them. Even if we don't get to them again, we'll get to you via email afterwards. Okay, in no particular order here. One of the questions here is on rising risk performance. How do you all think about outcomes in this cohort, given that 20% become those high-risk patients? One big issue is in rising risk management and interventions is the difficulty with the counterfactual. Interested if you all have a way to address.
Blake?
Shelley, do you want me to start? Sure. So that's a very thoughtful and sophisticated question. In a perfect world, we would, set up an ICE-RIB board and run everything through and set up a full prospective randomized controlled trial before we run any type of innovation. I've been told that is not quite feasible. The middle ground that we generally recommend is create a functional prospective trial where inclusion criteria are both the control and experimental group, and that patients that then enroll onto CareSignal, onto this white labeled program on behalf of your provider organization, are bucketed in the experimental group, and that individuals who don't enroll are put in control. And I can hear you saying, oh man, that's selection bias. And you're right, it is. But it works pretty well. And just given the large scale we're able to achieve, that seems to provide a pretty good proxy for full RCT.
Like your response reminds me of the one of the diabetes programs that CareSignal deployed, and the results of that was a 2-point improvement in hemoglobin A1C over 9 months. What I think is missed as part of that study is that those that opted out or chose not to engage with the CareSignal program actually had a regression of 1 point of their hemoglobin A1C. So really, when you look at the delta, it's 3 points. So thank you for letting me share that and boast on you all, boast on the program as well.
Okay, great. A couple more here, and we won't get to all of these because they're rolling in. So this is a good problem to have. Here's the next question. Your programs and technological capabilities appear to be very implementable. For what populations other than seniors or Medicare have you developed predictive models for? Commercial, Medicaid, and do your predicting models include assessment for SDOH components?
All of the above. And certainly with SDOH, I am an SDOH champion. I went to nursing school in Philadelphia. I worked as a pediatric critical care nurse, as Blake mentioned, and I saw firsthand the impact of social inequities and the disparities that impact those who are disadvantaged. Lightbeam itself is integrated with a prepare form, which is industry standard. It is an assessment tool that we are then able to segment and identify patients, to work with community-based organizations, provider groups, grants, FQHC grants, to be able to impact that. One of my favorite things about our CareSignal family and the solution that we offer through them is that when you have a patient who has diabetes or COPD, we don't just do an assessment of how are they, have they checked their sugars today? What are your sugars? Have you looked at your feet? How is your breathing? We're also asking the pivotal questions. Do you have access to fresh food? Do you have any housing insecurity? Because as a nurse or as a care manager, I can talk all day long about what somebody needs to do in terms of taking care of themselves. But if they do not feel safe, if they do not have transportation to the provider, if they do not have educational literacy to be able to read what they're supposed to do, none of it matters. Blake, anything you want to add there?
Not at all. You nailed it.
Okay. Next question is, how are care managers trained in the CareSignal Lightbeam system?
Shelley, do you want to kick it off on Lightbeam system?
Absolutely. So we do have a solution in place in terms of, those clinical advisors that I mentioned, and we also have a training department that work and partner with the clients and teach them both CareSignal as well as Lightbeam and provide that orientation. We also have the solution that we call Lightbeam Clinical Services. We have care navigators and registered nurses that work for Lightbeam that help to supplement and kick the program off. It certainly shortens the runway significantly because these are nurses that are very familiar with CareSignal, very familiar with VBC contracts, commercial contracts, Medicaid. They're also very familiar with Lightbeam and can jump in and get started and making impact right away. Blake?
On the CareSignal side, I think we follow Lightbeam's example to the greatest extent possible. It is a consultative, relatively rapid implementation where the main focus areas are best outcome identification. What does success look like within this partnership? How can we identify the right individuals that are eligible for different CareSignal programs? And that's made incredibly straightforward with Lightbeam's Cohort Builder, which is a powerful tool to identify the right patients in a dynamic and ongoing way. And then making sure that we're adhering to the standard of care, the alert thresholds, any escalation pathways that are already in place. And then once again, getting out of the way, letting our partners do the great work that you're already so good at doing.
Okay, we've got time for two more very quick questions here. The first is, what is the minimum number of patients you all need to start a new relationship?
You know, I'd say that I think the value really begins to ramp when there are 10,000 plus impactable lives, folks in that rising risk bucket. That said, you know, we've successfully served population with really strong ROI that are much smaller. Shelley, in terms of Lightbeam solution.
I agree. Typically, just from the risk reward, every life is precious. We typically see about 10,000 is where a good starting point is, and we can scale all the way up to hundreds of thousands of lives.
Okay. Unfortunately, this is the last question we have time for, and then we'll have to wrap up. But again, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. Again, we'll get to you afterwards. Last question is, how does the workflow look for nurse care managers?
Blake, if you wouldn't mind going to that slide, I can speak to that. The information comes in from CareSignal. It's, as I said, it's automated, and those workflows are customizable to the organization. We come in and want to work alongside of you and find out what workflows do you currently have? What kind of staffing solution do you currently have in place? What does that look like so that we can then optimize and enhance it? It's going to come in and based upon what your goals are. So if your preference is that, again, you have somebody who alerts or reports a glucose level of 200 for the third time in a row, for example, it's going to come into our cohort builder. It's going to be picked up, automatically put on a workflow. And again, that might be an administrative assistant who's going to reach out and say, Dr. Smith would like to see you next week. If you have somebody who's reporting increased, maybe they're doing 300, 400 blood glucoses, that might come in and be automated to a diabetic educator workflow. So it's going to come in, everything is very streamlined. They can document right in here. It is role specific. It's very customizable and individualized so that we can achieve the goals. As Blake mentioned, we look at where are you, where do you want to be, and we get you there. And this is an example of what the workflow looks like on the right in terms of what the priorities are. You can see, and they can document right in here and be able to pull analytics straight from here to be able to measure the success of the program. Really great questions. These are
great. Well, I hate to cut you off, but we are out of time. And unfortunately, again, if we didn't get to your question, we'll answer it via email. As we close out, and thank you so much, Blake and Shelley. This was such a great presentation, and I learned so much, I know personally. As we close out, I want to encourage you all to visit the CareSignal exhibit booth at vbcexhibithall.com. And here's where you can learn more about them and their team. You can interact with them. You can watch a little flash interview that we did with them. And this is just a great way to get some more resources about them. It's at vbcexhibithall.com. That's also where the recording is going to be housed in our archive library. So if you wanted to access it later, I will send it to you, but you can always access it in our library there. Finally, as we close, if you would like to reach out to Blake or Shelley, their contact information is here on the screen, or if you'd like to reach out to me, mine is as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Stay healthy and safe in these crazy times, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.